Hello, friends and gamers. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to what I have to say. Hopefully, if I've done a good enough job, that means when you are at happy hour, when you're having a beer, when you're talking to your friends, you might have just a little nugget of information, a little conversation topic that you can throw in there to sound more interesting. I don't know, to propose a different type of debate or discussion. That's what I'm hoping for. Am I asking too much? Well, how about this? Here's a simpler question. Can you have too much sex? That's right, it's Wednesday. This is my most popular podcast so far. Every Wednesday when I do a podcast about sex and video games, this one is the most popular. So make sure you share. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share it on wherever you do your social media. Tell people about the podcast and share it. Also, you can find the YouTube link there as well. If you don't just like to listen, if you have to actually watch my lips form the words as I'm speaking, you can go to YouTube and find this podcast. But too much sex. So this is what I was thinking. You know, you can eat too much food, right? You can put on the extra pounds. You can become unhealthy. You can develop health problems associated to eating too much. You can even become allergic to certain types of foods if you eat them too much. Let's say you really love, I don't know, hamburger, and you eat hamburgers every single day. Now let's just say that you have the perfect metabolism and you're never going to put on the extra pounds. Heart disease isn't your problem because you are, I don't know, half Superman or Superwoman, Supergal. I don't know what the correct, the proper gender pronoun is for that. But you could still develop an allergy. It's called food sensitivity. Too much of it, and doctors can be somewhat confused as to why you're developing allergic reactions to a food that previous didn't give you any sort of health concerns. Is it because it's just too much? Can sex be like that? I'm sure that's not what you were thinking whenever I asked the question, can you have too much sex? I'm sure the guys out there were like, no, of course not. Why? What a preposterous idea. Why would you ever suggest such a thing? Do not talk to my girlfriend. My wife. Don't tell her you can have too much. Damn it, I don't get enough. And I think I'm going to get to that in a minute. I'm going to get to the idea that why do men always feel they're having too much and women feel they're not getting... Well, we'll get to that in a second. But I was trying to think about it in terms of like food and also video games. You know, because this is a video game-centric podcast. You can get burnt out on video games. I was just going back and playing some older games like Call of Duty. And, you know, I have people pop up on my friends list and join the Xbox Live party. And we'll talk about which games you're playing. Will you buy the next sequel to the franchise? Will you continue on? Will you get Titanfall if it's a first-person... You know, I'm talking about first-person shooters here. If you haven't figured that out already, I don't play StarCraft. Not that it's a bad game, it's just not my thing. So, but at a certain point, does it become too much? Can you get burnt out on the video games? At a certain point, do you log on and you just can't find that thrill anymore? You just can't find enjoyment out of it? Is it because the game has come to an end of its life cycle? Is there a certain point where the game isn't meant to be played indefinitely? That once you've achieved all the unlockables and challenges met, does that mean that the game offers zero enjoyment? I don't believe that. I think you get burnt out on video games because you just want something new and different. It becomes repetitive at a certain point. It's like, you know, when I had the podcast about drug use, at a certain point, you just can't get that same sort of dopamine release from the video games the same way you did the first time. It takes more and more. You got to up the ante each time. It's why casual gamers end up becoming competitive gamers. They got to up the ante. It's why when you first learn to play poker or cards, you do it just for fun, but after a while you say, hey, I'm getting kind of good at this. Let's put some money on it and make it more interesting. You always hear that. Let's gamble. Why do you like gambling? Well, because it makes it more interesting. I like to have something riding on the game to make myself care about it. It's just about upping the ante, pun intended. You up the ante because you want the thrill again. And they talk about it with age. When you get older, you can't even listen to music in the same way. One, as you get older, you can't hear the same range of frequencies anymore. It just happens to people. It doesn't matter if you've listened to loud music. It's not about damaging your ears. It's just, it fades over time. That's one aspect. The other one is the first time you hear a rock song for the first time, or a good rap song, or you go to a dance club, you're never going to be able to recapture that feeling. It's just like, smoking pot for the first time, or shooting up heroin for the first time. You can't get back to that first time moment. That dopamine release, that thrill, that rush the first time, it's just the first time. Maybe it's also why when we think about sex, we always think back to like those earlier days, those first times, because it will never be that good again. We want to try our best to make it that good again, and try and unlock the secrets, tap into whatever it was that we enjoyed, and try and, reverse engineer that recipe. We can get close, but you can't get. I think that's why you get burnt out on video games. Sometimes people say, well, like I said before, do you need variety? Do you have to have a lot of games to be able to enjoy games and not get burnt out? And people will tell you that sometimes, like, change it up. If you like pizza, you shouldn't eat pizza every day. You're going to get burnt out on it. If you like this video game, you can't play it every single day, you'll get burnt out. When it comes to sex and relationships, we don't say that. Hell no. You don't say, don't just keep going out that one girl. You're going to get burnt out on her. Or him. If you're a guy, you're dating another guy. If you're a girl, you're dating another girl. If it's a girl dating a guy, or a guy dating a girl. If it's a girl dating two guys and a guy dating two other guys. I don't know. There's a lot of different combinations there. But the theme is still the same. You're not going to tell people in relationships they should spice it up by dating other people. Are we sexual omnivores? If you ask an anthropologist, they'll say that, yes, we are. Human beings are supposed to be sexual omnivores. And it wasn't until the advent of agriculture and commerce and economy that we went from hunter-gatherers to a system where we traded for sex, basically. The whole idea of proposing for marriage is, in a sense, an economy. I've talked about this on last week's podcast with online dating, and that's an economy. Well, in the early days of human beings getting together, it was an economy in that, well, when I'm saying post-agriculture, you're proposing. You're saying, hey, I have these goods and services I can offer. I can offer protection and these things for quality of life, and I can protect you. Will you give me sex for the rest of my life? Whereas if it's, I don't know, if it's 10,000, 100,000 years ago, we're hunter-gatherers, and, then it's all about communal sharing. It's about survival in your tribe. And some anthropologists believe that sex was among those things, and that, if a child was born, it was born into the tribe, not of a mother and father. And so the idea of sexual omnivores, that made sense for them. We're not that way today. Like I said, you bring that topic up today, and people just think you're, that you're out there, you're loony, you're smoking weed, living up in the mountains with Sherpas, and I don't know, whatever else hippie people talk about and do. That polyamorous stuff. Do some research on that one. It's strange. I'm not wrong. I'm just saying I don't identify with it because I didn't grow up that way. I've never been in a polyamorous relationship. I don't know anybody who has. But if we're playing a video game or eating a certain type of food, or we're just doing anything that we enjoy, people will warn you, don't do too much of it, you'll get burnt out. So I'm wondering, can you have too much sex? Can you get burnt out on sex? I was just talking about, polyamorous relationships, and really what it comes down to is monogamy. Can monogamy lead to getting burnt out on sex? I don't think so. I'm actually not saying that. But what I'm saying is, it seems like a contradiction of ideas, of ideals, right? Of morality. That if you don't want to get burnt out on something, you want to change it up. And so can you have too much sex? The answer would seem to be no, that you can never have too much sex. That human beings are just meant to have sex all the time. But then it got me thinking, because that's what I do. It got me thinking about, I think the sex, I don't think you can have too much sex in the same way that you can't ever have enough money. This is a topic people like to talk about. If it's the haves, the have-nots, the 99% versus the 1%, they're rich, you're not. Or I'm rich, those other people aren't, but they just haven't applied themselves. I think if you're a person who's feeling like your sex life is, I don't know, not up to standard or not up to your own expectations, it's almost like be careful. I want to say be careful what you wish for. And that just like the person who wants to earn more money, if you make $60,000 a year compared to someone who makes $30,000 a year, you make a lot of money. You're doing well. But if you make that $60,000 a year, chances are you work with people who also make around that same amount of money. And you probably live in a neighborhood where that's the median income. And so the things you have, the house you live in, the car you drive, anything that's a status symbol or a result that your monetary situation results in a better quality of life, you can't compare that. You don't realize how good you have it because when you look around, everybody else has it. All you then can see is the people who have more, the people who have even better than you. It's all relative. A friend of mine imparted that piece of wisdom on me a long time ago. It's all relative. He had gotten out of the military and had a really good job living up north of Boston. And I was still in the military and, I went to visit him for the holidays, him and his family. And it was really nice. And I was envious. I was happy for him that he was doing so well. But I was envious as well. You can't help that sometimes. You're like, you got what I want. Because I want to get there. I want to figure out whatever it is that you did, and I want to have that. And so he told me, just be careful. That's what he said. It's all relative. It's like that hip-hop anthem, more money, more problems. It's not necessarily problems, but it's all relative. And the problems that you had before, you'll still have. So in the idea of too much sex, if you think that you're not having enough and that you could never possibly fathom the reality in which you're having too much sex, well, maybe that speaks more to your own self and what you're looking for out of sex, what you're trying to find, whether it's pleasure, happiness, some sort of emotional fulfillment, that you're not getting what you need now, so therefore you can't possibly imagine somebody having too much of it. You might be envious of other people's relationships where they seem to be happy and in love and they just have an active and a fulfilling sex life, and you wonder, why can't I have that? Chances are those people aren't necessarily the perfect couple either, or they're not having enough sex. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a possibility they think they're having too much sex. Maybe one partner is just acquiescing to the other, and resentment builds up over time. Like, I'm not in the mood, but I'm going to give you some sex because I don't want to be a jerk. Over time, that'll develop into some relationship problems. I just think it's all relative. Wherever you're at in life, asking a question like, can you have too much of it? I don't think you can have too much. But I think inherently it says something more about, should you re-examine if you have problems, or re-examine what you want out of life, what you believe happiness is, what you believe emotional fulfillment should be, and where do you go to find that? That's my personal feeling. Because we all do have problems. We all do have issues. We have food allergies. We all have things that we like and hobbies that sometimes we get burnt out on. Sometimes we like to change it up. As far as sex is concerned, I don't think you're going to ever have too much sex to the point you're going to become allergic to it. I guess if you're having too much unprotected sex, that leads to other problems, health-related and so on. But I don't think you're going to develop an allergy just from having sex. I think that anytime there's an issue between men and women, or men and men, or women and women, or let's just sex in general. If you were really thinking about that question when I posed it to begin with, I think that's an issue. I think that should have been the warning sign. I think that's something that you should really spend some time and investigate it. The answer isn't as important as the question. Too much sex. What if you just want a lot of recreational sex and you believe you can't have too much of it? We live in a day and age where you don't have to get married. We don't live in that time when a man has to propose to a woman to protect her and offer her goods and services and those sorts of things. Women are capable. We've established that. I don't think that we live in a time when sex is something we should continue to barter over. So having recreational sex should seem like a fairly accepted practice, yet it's not, for morality reasons. People holding on to old cultural ideals. And that's okay. That's fine. Evolution takes time, right? But can you have too much recreational sex? And see, this is when I think that you have to... you've heard me talk about this before on these sex-related topics. I don't think that the physical act of sex, that part, I don't think that that's really what's satisfying you if you're having recreational sex. At least I know for me, if I was having a lot of recreational sex, that wouldn't be the part that I'm looking forward to. I'm not hunting. I'm not looking to bag trophies. Sex isn't a hobby. If it's about forming emotional bonds with people, and if it's about communicating, and like I said, you're looking for emotional fulfillment, a closer connection. You could probably do that recreationally, I suppose. I suppose you can, if people are in polyamorous relationships, they can have, and they can fall in love and share intimate relationships with multiple people. Maybe you can do that. I just know from my own experience, it's generally not like that. It's usually based on just pure physical attraction. And everything does seem like a hunt. You get to peacock when you're out in the club or the bar. Everybody wants to look good. You feel like you've used the right words and lines and said the right things to move from the bar or the club or the restaurant to somebody's apartment, somewhere where you're alone and it's private. And you feel like you've accomplished, like, okay, I'm getting closer. I'm going in for the kill. To use that hunting metaphor. I don't think that's quite... Because in the end, I think somebody's going to get disappointed. Because look, the act doesn't last that long. And look, if you are testifying that your sexual experiences are so amazing, men, I'm talking to you guys, that you profess that, oh, yeah, hours, man, multiple times, hours over and over again, weekend-long sessions. We have halftime. Good for you. I don't believe it, not for 1 second, but good for you. I mean, passionate lovemaking. If it's like 5 minutes long, it's a good long 5 minutes. Very memorable. I'm just saying. Don't feel bad about that. Don't be embarrassed. Because it can be 20 minutes or 30 minutes and it can be terrible the entire time. Just watching the clock, waiting for it to end. I think that if you look at it, if his sex is just a physical act, yeah, you could probably have too much of it and you could get burnt out on it because it's like eating. You're just looking for your own like physical sensations. You don't care about the other person. You care enough about the other person in that you want them to turn you on. You want them to arouse you. You want them to facilitate your orgasm, basically. I think that could get old because it's the same repetitive dance over and over and over again. You're not going to find anything new in there. And if it's a different person, if it's recreational sex and you're a sexual omnivore and you're pairing up, coupling with a different person every weekend or every other night, how you can't establish a history with that person. You can't establish that bond. Every time is the first time with them, but it's not your first time. And so it's like you're just reading from a script. You're going to do certain things. You're going to kiss her in a certain way that you've kissed every other woman that you've been with, if you're a man. Forgive me, I'm only speaking from my perspective. You're only going to continue to behave that way. How do you then take it to the next level? How do you actually communicate and learn, how do I satisfy this other person? How do they learn about me and understand what my real sexual desires are? You can't. You have to have an ongoing relationship or communication or dialogue, some sort of emotional bond to do that. And I think that's when it gets better. So I think you can't have too much sex if it's just empty, pure, physical, I just need to get my rocks off kind of sex. And there's nothing wrong with that either because everybody needs that sometimes. It's like you can be a hardcore gamer and still like Flappy Bird. You know, not everything has to be mind-blowing. Not everything, you can go and watch 12 Years a Slave and enjoy that movie, but sometimes you want to watch RoboCop. Not everything has to mean something. Not everything has to be earth-shattering. I get that. But relating back to, can you have too much of it? I think you can have too much meaningless sex. And I think you will get bored of it. And I think that's when you'll have to start investigating your own feelings and try and understand, what is it I'm really looking for? Can you have too much bonding? Can you have too much emotional bonding with people? Whether it's through sex, whether it's through friendships, whether it's through gossiping? No, I don't think you can have too much of it. I think human beings were meant to communicate. I think we were meant to form relationships, emotional bonds. I do believe in some of that kind of like, I don't know, like spacey, hippie ideas of, communal, spiritual understanding that we're all in this together. Humanity is one body. I kind of buy into that. Because it just seems to be so essential to one who I am that I don't feel good unless I'm connecting with somebody. If I have an idea, I've got to share it with somebody. I can't just sit in a dark room or a lit room and have ideas and not be able to share them. And I love it when I can learn or exchange ideas with somebody else. They have a different idea than mine. That's how I think how you grow as a person. Because look, I didn't develop any of sort of my opinions again by reading a book and then just self-evaluating. No, you have to go and talk to people. You express the idea or the opinion and again, you share something you read or you've learned. And then they give you their take on it. They give you their perspective. Maybe you don't quite get it in that moment, but let it sink in. A couple of days later, months later, couple that with your own life experiences, and then say, you know what? I'm a better person because of the people I've been around. And I think that's what I think when I say that, the kind of like the hippie idea that we're all one body, spiritual community, that you can't be a better person unless you've connected with somebody else. So I don't think you can have too much of that. I'm going to sound really like, I'm going to sound like a real anti-war, rainbows and unicorn kind of person if I say, I think that the world would be better off if we just sat around and talked. If we spoke about our feelings more. I'm not so naive to think that would actually happen. But even like with video games, what keeps me going back to those games, even though I'm having the conversation with friends online and they're talking about getting burnt out on the games, but yet we're still playing it. Why? Because I'm sharing that experience with somebody else. If I were to put that game in and play it by myself, yes, I would get bored. But I have somebody else to share it with. Just like sex, the meaningless sex, doing it by yourself, yes, you can. That can be too much. When you share it with somebody else, I think you can never have too much. And just like with the video games, it's not just about any connection. I want to play it with my friends. If I meet a new friend, I want to get to know them, play the game with them better so that we share tactics and strategies. The play style ends up becoming, or the game sessions end up becoming unique to that dynamic, that social dynamic of the people in that Xbox Live party that are playing. And that's fun. That's what I like. I don't want to just hear other people on the mic or know that another person's playing. We all know this. If you've played golf, you don't like getting paired up with just anybody. And you don't like some new guy coming into your foursome that you've never played with sometimes. You want to be able to establish a connection with that person. Playing golf and video games, is it like sex? I think I've established my opinion that the common denominator is a social interaction. On some level, they're all emotional bonds that you're forming. I think that's necessary. I think human beings want that. We need that. And I think that's why you can't have too much sex. If you've been communicating with it. Or if you've been using it as a form of emotional communication. That's just my feelings on it. All right, this was Sex Wednesday. I'm cutting it a little bit short. I've been running over. I'm trying to keep these to about 30 minutes. I've got some bad news, however. If you've listened this long into the podcast of this episode, then you are a frequent listener. The bad news is you're not going to be able to enjoy me every single day throughout the year. I'm going to end this season. This is the first season of Gamers on Tap podcast, where I do a weekly podcast Monday through Friday. I'm going to end it this Friday. It'll be the last one of this season. I'm going to take about a week or 2 weeks off, and we'll come back for another season. And that'll probably be the cycle. In between, however, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's Pub Talk podcast. And that's where I'm going to be interviewing game developers, YouTubers, esports athletes, anybody involved in video gaming that I feel are doing things in a transformative way. Just focus in on the new factor. If they're doing something new and different and exciting, if they meet the Gamers on Tap standards, if it's boring and average and you could find it on IGN, I don't want to talk about it. And so, sorry, those are my bad news. But that was the good news, is that the Pub Talk series will continue. That's a once-a-week podcast, and that's going to continue. This week, we will be having a special guest from Happy Playtime. That's that game app that I mentioned on previous podcast that teaches female masturbations. And I thought I would bring that up on today's sex podcast. Really looking forward to that conversation. Hope you will find that, and again, share that, tweet that to your friends. Having too much sex. Can you have too much video games? Can you have too much of anything? Thanks again for listening. Leave a comment, subscribe, share, tweet, and don't be afraid to have this discussion. Thanks again. I am Gunnar, and this was the Gamers on Tap podcast.